All right, folks, let's get into this one. This is a really important story. It came across the pipe a few days ago, and I wanted to just sit on it for just a second. And now I know that we need to really spend some time talking about it because of the obvious implications. Now, the title of the story that we're seeing coming across all of the newspapers is something to the effect of Russia deploys more forces into the Golan Heights. Now, of course, I want to make myself very clear here. We are not talking about the Golan Heights that is on Israel's side. We are talking about the Syrian Golan Heights. And I have talked about this a lot before. Russia, on multiple occasions, has declared this portion of the southern border of Syria as their own sovereign territory. As a matter of fact, before Russia went into Ukraine, there was a declaration that was made by Putin to a bunch of his own security officials during a very high-level meeting that he went out of his way to make known to the rest of the world that he regarded this portion of Syria as being the Russian border. Now, I want to say something. This has gone pretty much uncontested by a lot of people because Russia has sort of served as a bit of a buffering and stabilizing force that has existed in Syria, especially from the aftermath of what happened with Assad and ISIS and all of the other nonsense that's been happening over there in the region. So this isn't something that really is a surprise to anybody when you start seeing or talking about Russia being in the region, but this is of a particular interest to us because Russia, over probably the last year and a half, has been withdrawing a lot of their forces from this area. Yes, they're keeping a lot of their machinery in there, and they've been, sort of very active in a very indirect way, but they've sort of withdrawn quite a bit. And the mechanism of their withdrawal has actually gone somewhat unnoticed because Israel has appreciated what appears to be almost kind of like a very quiet permission from Russia to attack targets in Syria because of some of the hostilities that are beginning to grow in that region, especially because Syria isn't really all that sovereign of a nation anymore. It has become kind of a petri dish and a playground for all kinds of terrorist organizations. Remember, Hezbollah is known for being in Lebanon, specifically southern Lebanon, but understand they have quite the presence in Syria, especially because we are looking at the connection between Damascus and central Lebanon and the proximity that exists between the two of them. As a matter of fact, you could almost go straight across from Damascus to Beirut. And that's kind of an important connection to be able to make because as there is a rise in hostility between Iran and Israel, Hezbollah's actions are going to be a lot more closely monitored, not just only to the south of Lebanon, which would be the northern Israeli border, but of course they're going to be monitoring what is happening near Beirut and of course along the eastern border or the central eastern border of Lebanon, as well as that section in Syria that goes kind of further north from the southern tip. So that's a very important thing to note. And of course, it's also important to note that Syria is the homeland of all kinds of other nations that are doing all kinds of very nefarious things, right? We've talked about ISIS. We've talked about Iran. We've talked about Hezbollah. We've talked about many, many other organizations. Let's just call them terrorist organizations that are there. But this one is of unique interest because when they chose to actually move these forces in, when Russia did what they did, this would have been right after, a few hours after, Israel killed Mohammad Reza Sahidi. Now, many of you might not know who Mohammad Reza Sahidi is. For those of you that might not know, let me just explain who he is. He is, in essence, the highest ranking official, military official, a member of the Revolutionary Guard of Iran, and it's really important to note that, by the way, this is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, otherwise known as the IRGC. He's the highest ranking one that has been killed since Soleimani was killed, right? And Soleimani, when he was killed, it was a big loss. And some of you might not know this, but if you look at Mohammad Reza Zahedi for even just a second, you'll recognize that he has quite the resume in commanding and being a part of the IRGC. He did a lot, okay? He commanded the Air Force. He commanded all kinds of aspects of that military organization. And as a matter of fact, it's really interesting. He also commanded not just the ground force, but he also commanded a very elite section of the IRGC that also deals with the deployment of drones, Iranian drones, by the way, for attacking in other areas. At the time that he was killed, he was believed to be the commander of the Quds force, which we say al-Quds in Arabic. The idea here behind this is a force that was in Lebanon and Syria, designated specifically to deal with targeting Jerusalem. Kind of an interesting thing. A lot of people don't necessarily know that, but it is very important to note that this very specific force that he was commanding was recognized as a terrorist organization by many, many nations, not just Israel, but by Saudi Arabia, by the United States of America, by Canada, even Bahrain recognizes this. So you talk about even Arab nations look at this and recognize them as such. So it makes sense that Russia would do what it's doing, because by this targeting, and by the way, we have talked about this already, the building that he was in when he was killed with 6 other very elite, very, very, very important men to the IRGC, the building that they were in was this building that was attached to the consulate of Iran in Syria, actually specifically in Damascus. So this was taken very, very, very aggressively, or as an aggressive action by Israel against Iran. And it's still very difficult to tell what Iran is going to end up doing with this, because quite frankly, Iran, I believe, knew that something like this was coming, and it was just a matter of when it was going to happen. Now, I will post up some video here, just kind of showing you guys video of the operations, or some of the operations that are going on right now. And I figured I'll just play this while I'm going over some of the story. It is interesting to see what Russia is actually beginning to do. Now, let me read the story for you, because it is really interesting. It says this. It says, Russia's defense ministry announced on Wednesday it had deployed additional forces in the Syrian-controlled areas of the Golan Heights, where Israel had allegedly struck at an increasing rate over the last few months. The forces from Russia's military police were tasked with de-escalating tensions in the Syrian provinces of Quneitra and Dariyah, as well as monitoring the long-standing ceasefire issued as a part of the Syrian civil war. This is really interesting, because basically what this means, or sort of the interesting way of saying it, is they're seeking to keep Assad in power. That's kind of what it's talking about here. Assad really doesn't have a grip on his nation, but the countries that do keep Assad in power will be the ones that actually have rule and reign over that area and can go wherever they want. And Russia is basically sort of staking themselves back into the region in order to do this. Now, let me read what it goes on to say. It says, now Russia's decision to make their presence in the Golan Heights comes after Moscow condemned a strike blamed on Israel targeting the Iranian consulate in Syria. By the way, I want you to understand this. Russia has to do this, okay? Russia has to condemn it, although it is my belief that Russia knew about it, okay? And I know that because, or I assume that because the area that they struck would have had very, very, very important Russian assets nearby, or in many cases probably, I don't want to make a mistake and say in the building, but definitely they would have been close by. And so Russia would have had to have been warned about the operation, and I'm almost certain Russia basically looked the other way and moved away anybody that they needed to move away to make sure that none of their people were actually killed. But publicly, they have to condemn it because of their relationship with Tehran, and Moscow, of course, is never going to put at risk their relationship with Tehran, because we know that Iran is giving to Russia lots and lots and lots of assets necessary in order for them to continue fighting the battle that they are fighting, or the war that they're fighting in Ukraine. Also, it goes to stabilizing some of the other regions that are south of the Russian border, as well as some of the other problems that they have been running into in Libya. And there's a lot to say about what's happening right now in the civil war in Libya, but this sort of makes a lot of sense why this is happening, okay? Now, Moscow goes on to say that the Jewish state to cease such completely unacceptable actions, that's their quote, completely unacceptable actions, has requested a meeting with the UN Security Council regarding the strike. They're going to do this, folks. They have to do this. This is part of what they need to do. And of course, I want you to understand the Kremlin's sort of actions in all of this is not going to be admirable, okay? It's not going to be honorable. This isn't them having an interest in the people of Syria or anything like that. This is them targeting and protecting their interests, okay? This is them coming in and saying, okay, Israel, we've let you play for quite some time. We're going to step up and show you that we're still in charge, so you can't really do this the way you think you need to do this. I think they're going to be very mistaken in recognizing the fact that Israel is still going to do what it's going to do. And I do think that eventually what Russia is going to do is Russia's going to let them be what they are for the time being until they develop the alliance that we read about in Ezekiel 38, which again, they will come back down on Israel, and that's not going to be a good situation. But there is one important thing to note about Ezekiel 38, and that is the fact that Ezekiel 38 tells us that there is going to be peace that is sitting there in between all of these nations, okay, by the time that this attack takes place. Unwalled cities, we're going to be talking about, a whole series of things here, very, very unique to the circumstance that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about, right? Even to the point where Saudi Arabia objects without utilizing any force in Ezekiel 38 by telling Russia, what the heck is wrong with you? Like, what got inside of your head? Why did you think to do such an evil thing? Okay, so the article goes on to say this. It says Russia had also continuously used Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights as a sticking point in arguing for its invasion of Ukraine. By the way, that is a very complicated discussion here. And one of these days, I'll sit down and talk about what Russia's intimations have been regarding their rights to that section of the Golan Heights. There's a very, very, very critical set of facts that you have to go over and sit down and talk about. So one line in a news report isn't going to do it details, or isn't going to do the details any kind of justice, because there's a lot to why Putin makes the claim that he claims. By the way, it's absolutely insane, and it's absurd, and it's, yes, very inflammatory, but I think he has a hand in making those allegations simply because it's his way of turning some of the enemies against one another, kind of like ripping a leg out of the bottom of a table to destabilize the table so that the table can actually be controlled by whoever has that section. It's the same thing. That's exactly what's going on here. And it's a very complex issue, but it's one that we probably will dedicate a video to talking about at some point soon, because it is important. Okay. So look at what it goes on to say. It's really interesting. It says this. It says, last year, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused the United States of being hypocritical in its recognition of the Golan Heights as a part of sovereign Israel. Lavrov, who compared the Golan Heights to Ukraine's war-torn Donbas, hinted that the U.S. does not take its own vow to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all UN member states seriously. And that's actually very, very true. But I want everybody to understand this. All United Nations member states, heck, let's just say NATO for that matter, don't respect one another's sovereignty, right? They are not going to give Title V, not even the thought of the time of day when something happens in Poland. I can promise you that. But that's a whole other story. I'm not even going to get into that. It's just a completely ridiculous aspect of things. But look at this. This is really, really interesting, okay? It goes on to say, just before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, its deputy ambassador to Geneva told the UN Security Council that Russia doesn't recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights that are part of Syria. Now, I would expect to actually see that being said, and I would expect for them to make that stipulation because, again, we continue to see this type of issue, right? We continue to see this area being highly contended, by the way, not just for military reasons, but for other reasons as well. This is a big dog type of an issue here. Now, I want to say this because this is really, really, really important. I held back from reading this one line in the article because I think it's worth discussing last, okay? Here's the point in the article. It says this. It says, According to Russia, military posts belonging to the Syrian military are located below the Russian observation posts set up to monitor, watch this, possible provocations. This is Russia saying that it has posts in that area standing as almost like a DMZ, almost like a buffer zone to be able to monitor Israel's actions against Syria when they observe Iranian activity in the region. Folks, this is really interesting because when you begin to see statements like this being made by Russia's defense ministry, you can already know that there's a lot of other stuff going on that we don't see, that are behind the scenes, that eventually will come out. And when it does, boy, is that going to be a doozy of a story. I can tell you this right now. I can tell you that based on what we know from Ezekiel 38, the tension that exists between Russia and Israel is going to have to calm down at some point or another. Right now, it appears to be building, but in one way, we're going to have to see that begin to calm down. I think that can happen very easily. When is that going to happen? I have no idea, right? I mean, it's funny. Every single time we try to guess when certain things are going to happen in the Bible timeline, we always get it wrong. And there's a big reason for that, right? There's a massive reason for that. The reality of it is, in this particular situation and in this particular circumstance, all of these things are all the type of things that one single issue of the many issues that are being discussed here could actually set off all kinds of stuff that we are just like, my goodness, this could happen at any moment. This could happen at any day. So here's the deal. We have to watch Russia very closely. We've been watching Russia closely, but let me reiterate what I'm saying. We have to watch Russia very closely in several different regions. We have to watch Russia as it relates to Turkey. We have to watch Russia as it relates to Iran. We have to watch the presence of Russia in Libya, especially because of the civil war that's going on and what will be Russia's dominance in the southern Mediterranean. That's very, very important to note, right? That's the northern border of Libya is a southern Mediterranean. And we also have to watch Russia's activity in or around the Red Sea and what's going on in Sudan and potentially Ethiopia and Eritrea. There's a lot there, okay? We have to watch it all, and we have to pay very close attention, finally, to Russia's participation in matters going on in the southern peninsula. Peninsula, specifically as it, and when I say southern peninsula, I mean the southern Arabian Peninsula. I want to make myself very clear there. We want to pay attention to that because Russia's activity there in the Indian Ocean, specifically moving towards the Persian Gulf and moving towards the area of Oman and the area of Yemen, is really important. So scan the headlines. When you see headlines relating to Russia in any of those areas, you've got to pay attention because some interesting things are around the corner. And of course, as we see those stories, we'll bring them your way. We'll try to provide as much analysis as we can, bring some biblical perspective to it, and hopefully we'll begin to better be able to understand the geopolitics of the region and the flavor of what's happening, right? The temperature is changing rapidly on a whole bunch of levels, and it means for some very interesting things in the near future. There you have it, guys. Keep your eyes up. Keep looking to the Lord. And I say this all the time. I've been saying it for 30 years. And if I say it for another 30, I don't know if it'll be that long. I'll be happy to do it. But Christ could come at any moment. Pay attention. God bless you.